Case 623 by Danny Yu, Chapter 36. Sometimes in between missions, he remembers other things. He remembered broken bodies and blood on his hands. He remembered a skinny little boy with pointy elbows, hopping for breath in a cold apartment. He remembered that brief flash of warmth and pleasure, like taking a breath after years underwater. He remembered a ma, a pa, siblings. Sometimes in brief glimpses, he thought he remembered that other life. He remembered Bucky Barnes. But he couldn't connect. He didn't remember being Bucky Barnes. It was easier not to focus on it. It was far easier, just to think of the mission.
"How's he doing?"
Bruce asked as Tony stepped into their shared computer lab. Tony somehow managed to flash a grin that did not come out all grimace. "Oh, unfortunately, he's still Barton."
"That's terrible."
Bruce deadpanned. Tony shrugged. "He's fine. He's thirsty. Give him a week and he'll be giving my kid another Nerf gun." He sighed. "Do you know, I really kind of hate that he was right about the sniper aim thing. Last month, Jamie began hitting bullseye at 100 feet.
Bruce cocked an eyebrow. "At least it's just a Nerf gun,"
he said. "Better than the Nerf bow," Tony agreed. But here's the thing, Nerf weapons are a hell of a lot more inaccurate than, actual weapons. And 100 feet at not quite 6 years old. It was Bruce's turn to shrug.
"You weren't exactly a bad shot either,"
he said. Tony fiddled with the scepter, got it settled into a stand so Jarvis would be able to start analysis. "I can do bullseye at 150 feet, he said, with a good quality gun, properly weighted and balanced, with a decent sight and predictable kickback. One of the few good things my godmother did for me, she first put a live gun in my hand after I returned from my first bad kidnapping at age 5. So that means I've got more than 35 years experience." And he had worked hard at it too, especially as a kid. He was more likely to get Aunt Peggy to pay attention to him on the gun range than in a lab, after all. Jamie's gonna be a hell of a lot better than me, and I'm not sure whether to be comforted or scared out of my damn mind.
Bruce flashed him a tired smile. "I guess if Barton never has kids, you get to hijack them and indoctrinate them into becoming little engineers,"
he said. Tony winced. "Still requires some natural talent," he said. He sighed. Let it go. The scepter, after all, was still a lot more distracting than his annoyance at Clint's willingness to put weapons toward or no in Jamie's little hands. "Jarvis," he said in the end, "it's playtime. We've only got a couple days to figure out what this joystick's got to it, so let's make the most of it. Update me on the structural and compositional analysis." "The scepter is alien," Jarvis said, and Tony had to bite back the urge to say something along the lines of, "Yeah, duh!" "There are elements I can't quantify." "So there are elements you can," Tony concluded. "The jewel appears to be a protective housing for something inside. Something powerful." Tony frowned. "Like a reactor?" he asked, immediately interested. Anything that could advance the arc reactor technology or even help create the next step into the future was interesting by default. For whatever was coming, whatever it was he'd allow himself to ignore, to forget over the course of the past few years, they'd need incredible power to defeat it. "Like a computer," Jarvis corrected, and Tony felt a rush of adrenaline go through his system at those words. "I believe that I'm deciphering code. I will have a more thorough analysis ready in a few hours." Tony bit back his impatience and gave a sharp nod. "Good job, buddy."
"I'll go check on Joe and Barton," Bruce said. "Then I'll get dinner started. Meet you here after we eat?"
Tony nodded. "Jamie said he had homework," he said, and as much as the impatience itched, so did the urge to spend more time with Jamie. "I'll go see if there's anything I can do to help him out, or entertain him if he's finished already." Bruce flashed him a grin and filed out. Tony walked towards the elevator, silently grateful that Bruce didn't get all shocked and outraged whenever it turned out Jarvis wasn't omniscient. The other Avengers, more often than not, were caught somewhere in between not understanding what Jarvis was at all, and some kind of stupid expectance that he could do anything at any time. Bruce understood, and Tony appreciated that more than he could explain. The thing was, Tony, and by extension Jarvis, had always been limited by the time in which he lived. He did understand Howard in that aspect at least, in the frustration of being stuck somewhere he couldn't function at peak potential. Tony somehow had always been a decade ahead of where he was, ever since he was 4 and he'd made that first circuit board, which, for all that Howard had enjoyed boasting about it, had been mostly useless back then. It had been years before the machines that could properly utilize it had been invented. Tony, as a consequence, had learned how to make everything necessary to support his inventions, built and developed everything from the ground up. But even he had yet to develop processors powerful enough to let Jarvis reach his full potential. Even Tony had yet to figure out how to pack enough RAMs into a server bank without risking overheating or creating a large enough hard disk without taking up several city blocks. The internet wasn't powerful enough either, and it took permits to launch more satellites or build more towers, and those permits in turn took time, and the old ones became obsolete so damn fast that... Well, suffice to say that Tony was grateful someone else in his life outside himself and Jamie did not expect the as-yet impossible out of Jarvis. In a decade, there was every chance Jarvis could do this scan in mere moments, but it just wasn't possible yet. Just like it had been possible back on the helicarrier before the Battle of New York to have Jarvis carry out more than a narrowly targeted search of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s files pertaining specifically to the Tesseract and related projects. Just like it hadn't yet been possible to even make a real dent in the released S.H.I.E.L.D. Hydra files, not without sacrificing Jarvis's other functions. And Jarvis did not just run the penthouse and Avengers common areas, and Tony, Jamie, and Bruce's lives. He did not just run the suits, he ran the whole of the tower. He ran the security of every arc reactor-powered building in the world. He ran fabrication for Tony and SI's R&D department. He pretty much ran SI, and he still had enough bandwidth available to be a day-to-day, utterly necessary component of Tony's life, and had become the same for the rest of the Avengers. And, of course, his personality took up quite a bit of his potential as well, which to Tony was more important than any of the rest of it. And none of that really was something Tony was willing to sacrifice in return for quicker decoding of Hydra or alien files. Tony sighed and entered the elevator, letting it take him up to the penthouse. After dinner, Tony reached the lab before Bruce did. He was already deep into analyzing the data Jarvis had extracted by the time Bruce actually did walk in. Deeply enough, he had to admit, that he startled a little at Bruce's,
"What's a rumpus?"
"Well, the scepter," Tony said. "You see, we were wondering how Strucker got so inventive, so Jarvis has been analyzing the gem inside." He picked up his phone and scanned Jarvis's projection with a swipe of his thumb. Then he threw the first visual onto the holoscreens in front of him. "You may recognize." Flashing, ever-moving lines of deep golden code came into being in front of them. There was something oddly soothing about it, about seeing how quickly Jarvis worked, about his complexity and flexibility, and knowing that at the core of it all, the mandate to protect Jamie and Tony himself ruled supreme. It had been a hell of a lot more reassuring just an hour ago, though, before Tony had seen what else there was to be seen here.
"Jarvis,"
Bruce said. "Doctor?" Jarvis returned, voice unusually dry. Tony suspected he was the only one who really knew Jarvis well enough to hear the anxiety hiding deep behind those polite tones. "Starting out," Tony told Bruce, "Jarvis was just a natural language UI. Now he runs the Iron Legion. He runs more of the business than anyone besides Pepper." Bruce nodded. Tony was pretty sure he knew all this already, but he was patient enough to listen, and clever enough to know that Tony wouldn't have been reciting previously known data for no good reason. "Top of the line," Tony reiterated.
"Yes,"
Bruce agreed. "On Earth," Jarvis pointed out. "Meet the cosmic competition," Tony said. He flicked his phone at the processor again and called up the other image. Bruce's breath audibly caught in his throat.
"It's beautiful,"
he breathed. Tony dredged up a smile, but all he could feel was dread. "If you had to guess, what's it look like it's doing?" Bruce took a step closer, staring at the projection in fascination so deep it looked almost like rapture.
"Like it's thinking. I mean, this could be a... It's not a human mind, it..."
He trailed off, shook his head.
"I mean, look at this. They're like neurons firing."
Tony swallowed. "Down in Structure's lab, I saw some fairly advanced robotics work. They deep-sixed the data, but I gotta guess he was knocking on a very particular door."
"Artificial intelligence,"
Bruce said, and Tony kind of wanted to be offended because however Jarvis had started out, he easily qualified as a true AI these days. Hell, even the bots did, and Tony had several other rudimentary AA programs just sitting around, mostly souvenirs from his frantic post-Battle of New York extraterrestrial panic. But it was true that what they were looking at, those firing streams of something, not code, not in any language Tony knew, but not true neurons either, was far more advanced than anything Tony had created. Part of him couldn't help but think that with this he might just have a chance of finally creating the Ultron program he and Bruce had hypothesized and imagined and discussed to death in those first few months after the Chitauri invasion, when Tony was still packing his bag and getting ready to head back to California on a daily basis. Before AIM, before extremists, before Tony had forgotten that for all the threats on Earth, the real scary shit was still out there. With an artificial program this advanced and added to the Iron Legion protocol, Ultron would be near ready-made.
Tony,
Bruce said.
you are thinking...
Tony squeezed his eyes shut and counted to 10, forced away the strange compulsion, that sheer frightened temptation. Jamie was here, right in this tower. Tony wasn't going to risk him. Yeah, I am, he said. Of course I am, but we aren't going to do it. He took a deep breath. Jarvis, where's Mickey? Can I get Mickey here right now? He returned his attention to Bruce. We're not, he reiterated. First lesson on not getting virus infections all over your system. Don't omit any attachments if you don't trust the sender. I don't trust whatever's out there. I don't trust Loki, and I sure as hell don't trust Hydra. But this can still teach us so much. So we're going to study it. You're going to figure out how the hell it lets Strucker do human enhancement. I'm going to learn as much about its structure as I possibly can, and use that to help program Jarvis and the others. If nothing else, maybe it can help us learn more about what's out there. This is not Ultron, but it might be the springboard we need to create Ultron. He took a deep breath. Jarvis, set up an isolated server for the project. Give us as much processing power as you can spare. We only got this stick for 3 days. We got a lot of work to do. Bruce let out a breath that seemed as much disappointed as it was relieved.
Send over the files,
he said. Tony sent over the files and delved back into his study. All along, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone not entirely friendly was watching him.